When they go low, we go high. Michelle Obama first uttered this now famous catchphrase during the Democratic National Convention. She says people always ask her if the strategy still works, and she responds, "It's the only thing that works." Welcome to Module 11 of the Blooming with Intention Life Skills and Wellbeing course. I am your instructor, Amber Lee Forrester. In the last module, we gained an awareness of the components of high-quality connections and flourishing relationships. We learned that our relationships affect our well-being and learned ways to improve our relationship skills, like active listening and active constructive responding. On the opposite end of flourishing relationships are negative and unhealthy relationships. Just like we can have good friendships with family, friends, peers, and coworkers, we can also have bad relationships with family, friends, peers, and coworkers. In conflict, there are things we can't control and things we can. We may not be able to control what people say and do to us, but we can always control how we respond. We can choose to be a part of the problem, or we can be a part of the solution. We can judge and point the finger, or we can grow our potential to learn and grow. We can call on our emotional intelligence to prevent, manage, and resolve conflict. Conflict doesn't have to be bad. Challenges and disagreements can encourage growth, deeper understanding, improved communication, and progress towards a goal. This is Lesson 1, our introduction, where we are going to talk about and get a better understanding of conflict. In Lesson 2, we'll go on to discuss conflict management. In Lesson 3, Harm to Harmony, we'll discuss conflict resolution. In Lesson 4, we're going to talk about the power of forgiveness. And in Lesson 5, we're going to learn how to repair harm with restorative practices. Have you heard of restorative practices? Well, possibly. It's becoming very popular in schools and also in restorative justice as a way to avoid punitive punishment for conflict that we're having and look more at how to restore and repair harm. The objectives of this module are to understand conflict and what triggers it, to increase our awareness and teach skills to manage conflict. Again, I'm going to provide tools to resolve conflict, and we aim to empower you to achieve and create more harmony in and around you. We're going to learn those skills for transforming negativity in relationships and learn skills for redirecting to empowerment and away from trauma, disempowerment, and conflict. We're going to learn skills to transform negativity in relationships, exploring tools like the empowerment dynamic and moving away from the dreaded drama triangle. Also, we're going to learn to recognize forgiveness as both a strength and an intervention and learn to build our forgiveness skills. Ready? Everybody deals with conflict, so I know that this is relevant to you in one way or the other. You can use these skills for yourself and also for, again, the communities that you are a part of. So you'll learn how to better manage conflict that you're involved in and conflict that you may be witnessing. Are you ready to get a better understanding of what causes conflict and learn some new solutions to old problems? Let's dig in. Dis-ease equals disease, so please, let's learn to be more at ease. Just as healthy relationships have a positive effect on our health and well-being, unhealthy relationships have a negative effect on our health and well-being. Have you ever heard someone say, "You make me sick"? Well, this is quite a true statement. Conflicting values, motives, behaviors, needs, and goals can cause stress in any relationship. Stress leads to dis-ease, and dis-ease can lead to disease. Conflict in relationships leads to stress, and chronic stress often eventually leads to illness. But remember, conflict need not always lead to damage. There's a saying that goes, if you can deal, you can heal. You can choose to be intentional about resolving conflict. Furthermore, if you can learn to forgive the other person or maybe yourself, then you can truly alchemize your experiences. It's essential to gain awareness and understanding of how conflict can impact us if we want to learn how to strengthen our self-control and better manage our emotions. This is a part of our emotional intelligence. In an effort to understand how our emotional intelligence can lend to our conflict management and our conflict resolution, and other ways of achieving conflict resolution, we're going to reference the works of Daniel Goldman, John Gottman, and excerpts from medical journals and articles from websites like Simply Psychology and PositivePsychology.com. I recommend checking out more from these sites to improve your own mental, social, and emotional well-being and create a positive impact on others. More detail can be found in the references that follow these lessons. So let's start with exploring types of conflict. There's intrapersonal conflict, and that's conflict with self. There's interpersonal conflict, and that's conflict between two or more people. There's intra-group conflict, which is conflict between members of a group. And then there's intergroup conflict, which is conflict between subgroups within a group. There's also organizational conflict, and there's intra-organizational conflict within the organization and inter-organizational conflict, and that's conflict between two organizations. Most of what we're going to be exploring today is around interpersonal conflict. It's important to understand the potential of conflict, so we're going to explore some of the results of conflict. Conflict can be constructive or destructive. It can be creative or restricting. Conflict can be positive or negative. Destructive conflicts are also known as dysfunctional conflicts because such conflicts prevent a group from attaining its goals. It takes away attention from other important activities and undermines moral or self-concept. Dysfunctional conflict polarizes people and groups. It reduces cooperation, increases or sharpens difference, and leads to irresponsible or harmful behavior such as fighting and name-calling. Conflict resolution is critical to the health of a relationship. The most critical aspect of conflict affecting the health of a relationship is its resolution. If left unresolved, conflict can damage the bonds that form between people. However, if resolved, it can lead to greater understanding and trust and can strengthen the bonds that form between people. So let's take a look at constructive conflicts. Constructive conflicts are also known as functional conflicts. They support the group goals and help in improving performance. They result in clarification of important problems and issues and solutions to problems. Constructive conflicts involve people in resolving issues important to them. They also cause authentic communication and help release emotion, anxiety, and stress. They can build cooperation among people through learning more about each other. In constructive conflict, you're joining in resolving the conflict together. You're helping individuals develop understanding and skills. So do you see how conflict can be both destructive and constructive? We're going to talk more about conflict resolution in a bit, but let's first stick to understanding conflict. So now we're going to explore sources of conflict. Our core brain moves either towards a reward or away from a threat. Much of our motivation driving social behavior is governed by overarching organizing principle of minimizing threat and maximizing reward. This is what studies show. We have a human tendency to want to minimize threat. We want less threat to exist in our lives, right? It causes less conflict. Instead, we prefer to maximize reward. Threat can lead to internal and external conflicts. There's a SCARF model that we use in positive psychology, and the SCARF model summarizes the common factors that can activate a reward or a threat response in social situations or any situations where people collaborate in groups, including school, work, family settings, and general social events. The SCARF model involves 5 domains of human experience. That's status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, and fairness. You see the SCARF? SCARF gives us an easy way of remembering these so that we can refer back to them when these situations are in front of us. So let's dig a little deeper. Status, which can be defined as relative importance to others. Certainty, which can be defined as being able to predict the future. Autonomy, which we'll define as a sense of control over events. And then there's relatedness, a sense of safety with others or friend, rather foe. And fairness, a perception of fair exchanges between people. Now, these 5 domains activate either the primary reward or primary threat circuitry of our brains. By primary, I mean that a threat to either our status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, or fairness can cause a strong reaction in our brain because our brain is producing a similar chemical response as if our life were at danger. And this causes the strong emotional response. In the coming lessons, we will dig deeper into each domain and explore how they cause such a strong emotional reaction within us and ways to counter the threats that we may be experiencing or others with reward. So for now, let's look more at sources of conflict. Much of what I'll mention to you from John Gottman's research has to do with marriage, but marriage is a relationship. And so some of the things that I'm going to mention to you now are actually a part of the 6 key predictors of divorce. So if you're hearing some of these that I mentioned and you're also someone who's married and wants to pay specific attention to cultivating a healthy relationship within your marriage, then you really want to listen up. So these things can be applied to marriage relationships, to interpersonal relationships, to group relationships, and all of the above. Can you think of a time when someone has come to you to confront you about a conflict and they came to you all aggressive in the beginning? Maybe they came and they started criticizing and judging and pointing the finger at you right away. Well, this is what's referred to as a harsh startup. A harsh startup to conflict involves using criticism and blame to make a point. Well, studies show that 96% of the time, the way a discussion begins can predict the way it will end. So guess what? If you start off harsh, you're probably going to end off that way. When one person begins the discussion using a harsh startup, such as being negative, accusatory, or using contempt, the discussion is basically doomed to fail. On the other hand, when one partner begins the discussion using a softened startup, the discussion will most likely end on the same positive tone. In our relationships, there are causes of conflicts and their effects. Some of our responses to conflict can include responses to criticism, feeling like we're being attacked, our character, our personality is being attacked, and feeling like the other person has the intention of making us wrong so that they can be right. This can have a very negative effect on our conversation and on our engagement in our relationships. Criticism can include character bashing and generalizations like you always, or you never, or why are you so X, Y, and Z? Or, you're the type of person who, now you can fill in the blanks. I'm sure there have been situations where you've been in these situations where maybe someone doesn't understand you and they try to generalize you and say, you never listen to me. You always make me feel so terrible. These things can cause us to be defensive. In our future lessons, we'll learn more effective ways of giving criticism where the other person does not get so defensive. There's also thinking traps. Do you know what a thinking trap is? Well, a thinking trap is a habitual way of thinking that narrows our focus and stops us from flexible and accurate thinking. Thinking traps include things like jumping to conclusions, and these can worsen our criticism. Of course, criticizing is already bad enough. It doesn't feel good to be criticized. When the other person, or when we ourselves, are jumping to conclusion, this can just make things worse. We have a lot of assumptions that we're making without examining the facts. Again, we're going to talk more about this in conflict resolution, but right now I just want you to understand some of the ingredients to conflict. Another one of those ingredients is contempt. Contempt can be defined as attacking a person's sense of self with the intention of insulting or even psychologically abusing that person. Contempt includes insults like name calling and hostile humor, sarcasm, and mockery. There's also body language and the tone of our voice, such as doing things like sneering and rolling our eyes or curling our lips. This can all be a part of contempt. And again, this doesn't feel good on the receiving end. It doesn't feel so good on the giving end either, right? So there are effects that are going to result from contempt, like defensiveness. Defensiveness is seeing ourselves as the victim and warding off a perceived attack. So we're seeing ourselves as the victim and we get defensive. We start to make excuses, start to say that maybe there's circumstances that are beyond our control. It's not my fault. When we're defensive, oftentimes we also do some cross-complaining. Now, this is something in relationships that if any married person is watching now, you're probably going, cross-complaining, I think I know what that means. Well, it's meeting your partner's complaint or meeting someone else's complaint with criticism of your own. So you're ignoring what your partner says and then you're saying, well, that's not true. You're the one who, and then you're pointing out that thing that someone else does to you. This can make someone very defensive. Or there's the famous yes, but. Do you know what yes, butting is? Start off agreeing, but then you end up disagreeing. So yeah, I hear you, but, and then you insert your opinion or your criticism there. This can also make someone defensive. Repeating yourself without paying attention to what the other person is saying is another way of making them defensive. If you're continuing to try to prove your point without hearing what they have to say, you're just going to increase the conflict and likely you're not going to go anywhere in it. Some of us tend to stonewall in response to conflict, and that means that we're withdrawing from the relationship as a way to avoid conflict. Someone may think that they're trying to be neutral, but stonewalling conveys disapproval, icy distance, separation, disconnection. Silent treatment is a form of stonewalling. So in an effort to build our awareness around conflict and when it's happening, because some of us are more empathetic than others, some of us feel and sense and have more emotional intelligence than others. And so I really want to be explicit in explaining what some of the indicators of conflict are. When tension builds, we experience a stress response in our body. Have you ever heard of an amygdala hijacking? Well, our amygdala, which we'll learn a bit more about later, but for now I'll tell you, our amygdala is a part of our limbic system, and our limbic system regulates our emotional responses. When we're experiencing an amygdala hijacking, we could experience rapid heart rate, clammy skin, dilated pupils, sweating, goosebumps on our skin, increased blood sugar, and contracted blood vessels. So those are some of the not so obvious indicators of conflict. Now, the obvious indicators of conflict include shouting, verbal abuse, and crying. These are signs that our emotions have taken over us. And oftentimes this is in response to a chemical reaction that's happening in our body. Remember, some of the ways that we process conflict are similar to the ways that we process a life or death experiences, which is why our emotions can be so high. Because remember, sometimes conflict is obvious and sometimes we have to use our emotional intelligence and pay close attention. So we can notice signs such as body language and facial expressions. If someone is upset, you can often see it in their face. I have friends that joke with me and they say you can see all of my expression in my eyebrows. If I'm upset, that eyebrow goes up or it shrugs down. And this is something that's very common amongst human beings. We can observe facial expressions, body language. If our arms are folded, if we're closed off in our body expressions, these are signs of conflict. There's also lack of cooperation. Now, this might not be as obvious, but if someone's been experiencing conflict, what you may notice is that they start to stop and intentionally stop cooperating. You can also notice in conflict that people may not be speaking to each other, or they're ignoring each other or leaving someone out. We'll talk about bullying in a bit, and this is a way that girls bully because girls often bully different than boys do, but girls can bully by not speaking to each other and ignoring each other or leaving each other out. And this is a sign of conflict. There's also an increasing lack of respect. So if you are dealing with someone and you're noticing that they're becoming increasingly disrespectful, they may not be expressing to you that they're experiencing some type of conflict with you. Strong public statements are another sign of conflict. If you get someone that just blurts out something very extreme in the middle of a meeting or in the middle of class, this can be a sign that there's something beneath the surface. And in modern day and times, one way that we address conflict is by airing our disagreements through social media. And so as a parent or as a teacher, this may be another way to recognize when there is conflict, where you're getting subliminal messages or even outward messages on someone's social media that are expressing that they have a problem with someone or with a group. Now you've learned ways to recognize conflict, and you're aware that there is a potential to use conflict for good. In our next lesson, we're going to explore how to do so as we explore conflict management.